The dangerous arrival. The sky above Earth darkened as a massive spaceship slowly descended through the clouds. Its sleek, silver body reflected the sunlight, but the mood on the ground was anything but calm. People from all over the world watched in awe and fear as the alien craft touched down in an open field. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Too large, too strange, and radiating an ominous aura. As the spaceship's engines hummed to a halt, the silence that followed was deafening. No one knew who they were or what they wanted, but everyone knew one thing for sure. Earth was not ready for whatever was coming. The ship's hatch slowly opened with a low, grinding sound. The crowd at a safe distance could feel the air shift, thick with tension. From within, an alien figure emerged. His skin was a dark, gleaming green, his eyes glowing a deep red. The crowd gasped in unison, some taking steps back, others frozen in fear. This was no ordinary being. The alien was a king, towering and regal, his presence alone commanding attention. He was followed by something even more terrifying. A beast. It was not just any creature. It was a massive wolf, bigger than any animal the humans had ever seen. Its fur was a dark, almost metallic shade, and its eyes mirrored the king's, fiery red, burning with an unnatural glow. The wolf's mouth was slightly open, revealing rows of sharp, deadly teeth. Its breathing was heavy and ragged, but it was clear that it was in pain. The beast limped as it followed the king, dragging its massive body with difficulty. Its once powerful form seemed broken, like something had taken away its strength. The king knelt beside the wolf, his hand gently brushing through its fur. His face was a mixture of sadness and determination. He spoke to the creature in a language no one understood, his voice low and calm. The wolf whimpered, clearly struggling. The king's expression darkened as he looked up at the crowd, his gaze cold, yet full of urgency. He needed help. He raised his hand and spoke in a language that humans could understand. "I request medical assistance for my companion," he said, his voice booming across the field. "This creature has fought battles for me, and now it needs care. I demand that you treat it." The humans were paralyzed with fear. No one dared to move. The alien king had come to Earth with his wolf, and they could feel the weight of his words. He was not asking for help. He was demanding it. His tone left no room for negotiation. His gaze swept over the crowd, waiting for someone to respond. But no one did. The fear that gripped the humans was palpable. The wolf looked harmless enough at the moment, but it wasn't its size or appearance that made people afraid. It was its reputation. This creature had been part of a series of brutal attacks across the galaxy. Its massive form and sharp teeth had torn through cities on other planets, leaving destruction in its wake. It had been responsible for the death of countless beings, and now it was here, on Earth, with its king. Rumors had circulated for years about the alien king's savage beasts. Stories spoke of their strength, their savagery, and their ability to bring entire civilizations to their knees. The thought of coming face to face with one was terrifying enough, but the reality was far worse. "Please," the king said again, his voice softer this time, but still carrying a commanding force. "You must help." Still, no one moved. A group of scientists and doctors, who had been closely watching the alien arrival from a secure facility, whispered among themselves. They had seen alien species before, but never one like this. They had seen what the wolf had done to other planets. They had heard the stories. And now, standing before them, was a being who was both magnificent and terrifying, an alien king with a wounded monster by his side. The humans couldn't understand why the king would risk bringing the wolf to Earth. They knew the creature was dangerous, yet the alien king's loyalty was unwavering. It was as if he cared for the wolf deeply, even though it had caused so much destruction. The king's unwavering devotion made it even harder for the humans to make a decision. Should they help him, or should they be afraid of the potential consequences? Finally, a doctor stepped forward, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He was an expert in treating strange and rare diseases, but he had never dealt with something like this. He took a deep breath and approached the king. His hand shook, but his voice was steady. "We cannot treat your wolf," the doctor said cautiously. "It's too dangerous. The infection it carries could spread to Earth. We cannot risk that." The alien king's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the air around him seemed to freeze. The tension was unbearable. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the king's response. Would he lash out? Would he destroy everyone who dared to refuse him? Instead, the king sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping slightly. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice low but firm. "This creature is not the enemy. It is my companion. It is the key to our survival." The words echoed in the silence that followed, leaving everyone wondering what the alien king meant. The crowd was still, unsure of what to do next. Would they refuse the king's plea, or would they help him and risk the unknown dangers that could follow? The doctor's eyes flicked back and forth between the king and the wolf, trying to understand the truth of what was happening. The audience was left on the edge of their seats, waiting for the next move. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was certain: whatever came next would change Earth forever. Fear of the beast. The silence hung heavy in the air as the alien king stood before the crowd, his gaze unwavering. The tension was so thick it seemed as if even the wind dared not stir. The doctor who had stepped forward to speak was still standing there, unsure of what to do next. The alien king had made it clear that he wanted help for his wolf, but something about the creature made everyone hesitate. Despite the king's gentle words and his plea for assistance, no one was willing to come closer. They had heard the stories. They had seen the destruction the wolf had caused on other worlds. It wasn't just an animal. It was a weapon, a living, breathing nightmare. As the minutes passed, the crowd began to disperse, slowly retreating from the scene, their eyes never leaving the wolf. Whispers filled the air, as people exchanged stories of the beast's bloodshed on distant planets. The whispers grew louder, filling the air like a storm. "I heard it once tore through a city on the planet Zorith," one voice muttered. "The entire city was wiped out in minutes. They say the wolf could smell fear and hunt it down like nothing else." Another voice added, "The king has controlled it, but can we trust that the beast has been tamed? What if it decides to turn on us? No one here is trained to deal with something like that." The alien king noticed the rising fear in the crowd, and his expression tightened. He knew that fear was his enemy. It was not easy for anyone to trust a creature like his wolf, especially when it had a reputation for savagery and destruction. But what the humans didn't know was that the wolf wasn't always like this. It hadn't been born to wreak havoc. It had been changed, twisted by forces beyond anyone's control. The king turned his attention back to the doctor, his eyes pleading. "You don't understand," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the whispers. "This wolf was not always like this. It was once a protector, just as I am. Something happened to it, something that I must fix. You have no idea what it's been through." The doctor, still standing alone at the forefront of the crowd, hesitated. She had heard rumors about the wolf, stories of its incredible strength, its vicious attacks, and the way it left nothing but destruction in its wake. But the alien king's words rang true in her heart. There was something deeper at play here, something more than just a dangerous animal. The king's words were like a spark in her mind. Could it be true? Could the wolf really have been a protector once? And if so, what had changed it? The doctor found herself wanting to learn more, to uncover the truth behind the beast's dark past. But as she stepped closer to the king and his wolf, a chill ran through her body. The wolf, despite its weakened state, locked eyes with her. Its fiery red gaze was full of malice, and its growl echoed through the air like thunder. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she instinctively took a step back, her heart racing. The king seemed to sense her fear. "Do not worry," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It will not harm you. It trusts you. if you choose to help." But the fear in the crowd was growing, not just from the wolf, but from the unknown. No one had any idea what the alien king was truly capable of. The idea that such a creature could be tamed, let alone healed, seemed impossible. What if this was all a trap? What if the king was using the wolf to test the humans, to see if they would be weak enough to be controlled? The doctor turned to face the crowd, trying to gauge their reactions. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, all of them questioning her decision. Could she help the king, or would she be endangering everything by doing so? The whispers grew louder, turning into a chorus of doubt. "We can't trust him," one voice said. "This could be a trick. What if he's lying about the wolf? What if it's infected with something worse than we could ever imagine? Are we really going to let this alien king use us as pawns in his game?" Another voice questioned. "We have to think about Earth's safety." The doctor's mind raced. She could see that the fear was overwhelming, clouding everyone's judgment. But as she looked at the king, she saw something different in his eyes, something that told her he was desperate, not for power, but for something more personal. He wasn't trying to control Earth. He was trying to save what he loved. It was a truth that no one else saw, but she could feel it. The wolf, despite its terrifying reputation, was not the true enemy here. There was something more complex beneath the surface, something that needed to be understood. She turned back to the alien king. "I will try," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "But I will need more time. This creature is unlike anything we've seen. I cannot guarantee success." The king nodded, his expression softening. "That is all I ask," he said quietly. "Please, give it a chance." As the doctor approached the wolf, the crowd parted, some with uneasy glances, others too fearful to watch. The wolf's eyes followed her every move, its growl still low but somehow less threatening than before. There was a flicker of something familiar, beneath its gaze, as if it could sense that she wasn't like the others. The doctor reached out slowly, carefully, as she prepared to treat the beast. But as she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from the shadows, something far more dangerous than the wolf. The alien king's cryptic words echoed in her mind. "This creature is the key to our survival." What did that mean? And what would happen if she failed? The answers, she realized, might change everything. The king's plea. The air around the alien king and his wounded wolf was thick with tension. The crowd had mostly retreated, leaving behind only a few brave souls who stood at a distance, watching the unfolding drama. The doctor, still wary of the wolf but determined to help, approached it cautiously. Her mind raced, filled with questions she couldn't answer, but she couldn't back down now. There was something in the king's eyes, something that suggested he wasn't just a ruler demanding treatment for his beast. He was desperate, and the wolf's survival might mean more than she could ever imagine. The king remained by the wolf's side, his eyes locked on the doctor as she prepared her medical equipment. His posture, though regal, betrayed an undercurrent of anxiety. He seemed to trust her, but the weight of the situation was clear in his gaze. He wasn't just trying to save a pet. He was trying to save a piece of his past, a creature that had fought beside him in countless battles across the stars. The bond between them was evident, and yet it was more than just loyalty. It was something deeper, something that made him refuse to leave his wolf's side, even as it lay suffering before them. "I know you don't understand," the king said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. His words were not directed at anyone in particular, but seemed to be a confession, a burden he needed to share. This wolf was once more than a protector. It was a symbol. It represented something larger than myself, something that bound my people together. The doctor paused in her work, glancing up at him. His words caught her off guard. The wolf wasn't just a beast. It was a symbol of unity, of hope, for an entire alien civilization. The weight of that realization hit her hard. "I don't know what you've been through," the doctor replied cautiously, "but if you want me to help, I need to know more. I need to understand what happened to it. "What's wrong with the wolf?" The king's gaze softened, his posture relaxing slightly. For a moment, the alien's facade of power and control slipped away, revealing the vulnerability of someone who had lost much, who had watched helplessly as his companion, his closest friend, succumbed to an unseen threat. "The wolf is not just sick," he began, his voice growing heavier with each word. "It is cursed. It was infected by a parasitic entity, a creature from a distant galaxy. It attached itself to the wolf during our last mission. I thought we could fight it off, but I was wrong." The doctor's hands froze, her heart skipping a beat. A parasitic infection was one thing, but a sentient, parasitic entity, that was something entirely different. The possibilities of what this parasite could do, how it could spread, made her stomach churn. But the more she listened to the king, the more she realized there was something important he wasn't saying. "You say it's cursed, but how?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "How did it infect the wolf? And why didn't you seek help sooner?" The king's eyes darkened as he looked down at the wolf, who lay still but restless. The beast's labored breathing filled the silence between them. The king stroked the creature's fur, his voice distant. "I've been trying to find a way to save it, to reverse the damage, but the parasite is cunning. It doesn't just consume the host's body, it controls it. It twists the creature's mind, turning it into something violent, something uncontrollable." His words struck the doctor like a blow. She had heard of parasites before. Some species use them to control weaker organisms, but this was different. A parasite that could control an entire being's actions, twist its instincts. That was beyond anything she had encountered. "And what does it want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The king's eyes met hers again, this time filled with regret. "It wants the wolf to become its vessel. Once it has full control, the creature becomes nothing more than a puppet, a tool to carry out the parasite's will." "But that's not the worst part," he said, his voice growing strained. "The parasite isn't just after the wolf. It's after me. It has been using the wolf to draw me in, to make me weaker, to break my connection with it. It's only a matter of time before it reaches me, before it consumes everything I've worked for." The doctor took a step back, stunned. The wolf was not just a victim of an alien parasite. It was a weapon, a trap designed to bring the king to his knees. And now it was lying in front of her, vulnerable and sick, with the alien king watching helplessly. There was more to this than just a medical emergency. This was a battle for the king's soul, a fight against an enemy that had already won so much. The doctor exhaled slowly, trying to process the weight of the situation. She glanced at the wolf again. Despite its terrifying appearance and savage reputation, she now saw it differently. It wasn't just a mindless killer. It was a creature caught in the middle of a war it never asked for, fighting for its life as much as its master was. And if the king's words were true, then saving the wolf wasn't just about fixing an animal. It was about saving the king's entire future. "I'll do what I can," the doctor said, her voice firm now, filled with determination. "But I need your help too. This isn't just about healing a wound or treating an infection. If this parasite can control the wolf, then I'm going to need more than just medical supplies." The king nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I will assist you in any way I can," he promised. "I owe it to the wolf, to both of us. I won't let this parasite destroy us." As the doctor set to work, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a physical battle. It was a mental one too. The wolf's body was only part of the puzzle. They needed to fight the parasite on a deeper level, to break its hold over the wolf's mind before it consumed them all. The tension in the air thickened as the doctor prepared for what would be the hardest challenge of her career. The alien king, his once mighty wolf now vulnerable, stood by her side. Together, they would face an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy that had already begun to take control. And in that moment, the doctor knew one thing for sure. This battle would change everything. The hidden truth. The alien king stood silently beside the doctor, watching her carefully as she worked. The wolf, though still showing signs of pain, seemed to trust the doctor, its fiery eyes now calmer, though it still emitted a low, constant growl, as if warning anyone who came too close. The doctor could feel the weight of its gaze, sensing the deep suffering hidden behind the creature's wild exterior. She moved cautiously, measuring out medications and preparing tools to begin the procedure. But as her hand shook slightly, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was more to this parasite than she had been told. The room was filled with a tense silence, the only sound being the heavy breathing of the wolf and the soft rustling of the doctor's gloves and medical instruments. Her mind raced with questions. The king had said the parasite was cunning, able to take control of the wolf's mind and body. But how? What kind of creature could possess that kind of power? As she examined the wolf's wounds more closely, something caught her eye. There was a faint, glowing pattern running beneath its skin, a pattern that pulsed with an eerie light. The doctor's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an infection. This was something more complex, something deliberately designed. She hesitated, then gently pressed her fingers against the wolf's side, tracing the strange markings. They moved beneath the surface like tendrils, twisting and shifting as if alive. It wasn't just a parasite. It was a symbiotic organism, a living entity that had fused with the wolf's very essence. This wasn't an illness that could be cured with medicine alone. It was as if the wolf's body had become the host for something far more dangerous, a sentient being that could control and manipulate its every move. The doctor looked up at the king, her expression pale. This is unlike anything I've ever seen," she said, her voice tight with shock. "It's not just a parasite. It's a living, breathing organism. It's fusing with the wolf, becoming part of it." The king's face darkened. He had known that the parasite was powerful, but he hadn't realized the extent of its control. It wasn't just about the wolf's body, it was about its soul. This creature wasn't simply feeding off the wolf, it was bending it to its will, reshaping it from the inside out. "This parasite was created," the king said, his voice low and filled with an eerie calm. "It wasn't a natural infection. It was engineered, a weapon created by a species that once sought to conquer the galaxy. The creatures who made it used the wolf as an experiment, testing their ability to control and manipulate life forms." The doctor looked at him, her mind trying to piece together the gravity of the situation. The wolf had been a victim of something far worse than just an illness. It had been weaponized, turned into a tool of control. "But how?" the doctor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would anyone want to control something like this? It's not just a weapon, it's a life form, a sentient being." The king's eyes flickered with a mixture of sorrow and rage. The creatures who created the parasite were once a powerful, cruel race, bent on using other species as tools for their domination. They experimented with countless beings, trying to create the perfect weapon, a creature that could be controlled and made to fight for them. The wolf was one of their most successful experiments. The doctor felt her stomach churn as she processed his words. It was clear that the wolf had once been more than just an animal. It had been something powerful, something with its own consciousness and purpose. But now it had been twisted, reshaped into a tool of war and control. And the king had been bound to this creature in ways she could not yet understand. "I thought I could protect it," the king continued, his voice almost breaking. "I thought I could save it, but it was too late. The parasite had already taken hold. And now it's not just the wolf at risk. It's my entire world." The doctor's mind raced as she tried to piece together the implications. The parasite was far more than just an alien organism. It was a weapon that could be used to control entire populations, entire worlds. If it had been created by an advanced civilization, there was no telling what it was capable of, what kind of destruction it could cause. And if the king's bond with the wolf was as deep as he claimed, then he was just as much a target as the creature itself. The doctor's eyes widened with realization. You said the parasite was after you. What did you mean? The king's expression hardened, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. The wolf was never meant to be just a protector. It was always meant to be a weapon. And I was meant to wield it. But the parasite doesn't just want the wolf, it wants me. It knows that I am the one who can control the beast. If it fully takes over, it will use the wolf to control me, to make me its puppet. And then, it will use me to destroy everything I've worked for. The doctor's heart pounded in her chest. This was far worse than she had anticipated. The parasite was not just a disease. It was a force, a dark intelligence that had been designed to control and manipulate. The alien king wasn't just asking for help to save his wolf. He was asking for help to save himself from a nightmare that could unravel everything. I can't let it happen, the king said, his voice filled with resolve. The wolf may be the key to stopping the parasite, but I need your help. You're the only one who can understand what's happening to it. I can't do this alone. The doctor stood still for a moment, her mind reeling with the implications of his words. She had been treating the wolf as a patient, as a creature in need of medical care. But now, she realized that this wasn't just a battle to heal. It was a battle for survival, for freedom. The parasite had to be stopped, not just for the wolf's sake, but for the sake of the entire galaxy. Tell me everything, the doctor said finally, her voice steady, filled with determination. I need to know how to fight this. The king nodded, and together, they began to form a plan. But they both knew one thing for certain. The path ahead would not be easy. The battle against the parasite had just begun. And the secrets of the wolf, its true nature, its dark past, were only just starting to unfold. The battle within. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. The doctor, along with the alien king, worked tirelessly to study the parasite that had taken hold of the wolf. They examined the creature from every angle, trying to understand its biology, its behavior, and most importantly, its connection to the wolf's mind. But despite their efforts, every time they thought they were getting closer to a solution, the parasite adapted, shifting its grip. It was as if it had an intelligence all its own, responding to their every move. The wolf's condition continued to worsen. Despite the doctor's careful treatments, the glowing patterns beneath its skin had only spread, growing brighter with each passing hour. The creature's once dominant muscles had begun to atrophy, and its breathing became more ragged. The wolf's wild, fiery eyes seemed to burn with feverish intensity, locked in a constant internal struggle. It was no longer just an animal in pain. It was a battleground, the fight for control raging inside it. The alien king had been by its side every step of the way, watching with a mixture of hope and despair. His presence, though steady, seemed to weigh heavily on him. The bond he had with the wolf was not just one of loyalty. It was something deeper, something that connected their very souls. The king had been its protector, its companion, for years. But now, he was caught in a cruel twist of fate. He had to watch his closest ally fight an enemy it couldn't even see. And yet, despite the suffering of the wolf, the king never faltered. He knew that if he lost the wolf, he would lose more than just a companion. He would lose his own soul. The parasite's true power lay not only in its ability to control the host's body, but in its ability to erase everything that made the host who they were. The doctor could see the toll it was taking on the king. His eyes, once sharp and full of command, were now clouded with exhaustion and frustration. He had given everything for this fight, and yet he could feel the walls closing in on him. Every hour that passed, every failed attempt at treatment, brought them closer to a terrible truth. The parasite was winning. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows grew long, the doctor sat alone in a corner of the room, reviewing her notes. She had spent countless hours trying to find a way to sever the parasite's hold on the wolf, but nothing had worked. The creature was far too powerful, far too advanced for anything they had on Earth. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden growl that rumbled from the wolf's throat. The doctor jumped to her feet, her heart racing. She turned to find the wolf staring at her, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. The wolf's gaze was no longer wild. It was filled with something else. Intelligence. Understanding. And with that, the doctor realized something terrifying. The parasite wasn't just controlling the wolf's body, it was learning. It had been watching them, adapting to their every move, every strategy. The wolf's body twitched violently as it let out another growl, a low, guttural sound that filled the room with a sense of foreboding. The creature was no longer the same. Its mind had been corrupted, twisted into something unrecognizable, and now it was fighting to break free. But from what? The king appeared at the doorway, his eyes wide with concern. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight. The doctor looked at him, her face pale. "It's not just the wolf anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "The parasite is more than just a disease. It's trying to break through, trying to take full control of the wolf's mind. It's learning how to fight us." The king's face hardened as he moved toward the wolf. "I knew it was only a matter of time," he muttered, almost to himself. "The parasite is evolving. It was never just a disease. It was a weapon. And now it's becoming something far worse." The wolf's growl turned into a snarl as it lunged forward, its teeth snapping dangerously close to the king. The doctor's heart skipped a beat, but the king didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his eyes never leaving the creature. The wolf's eyes flashed with a deep, unsettling intelligence, and in that moment, the doctor realized the terrifying truth. The parasite was trying to turn the wolf against the king, to sever the bond between them. It wasn't just about control anymore. It was about breaking the one thing that could save them. The king's voice broke through the tension, firm and commanding. "Stop." To the doctor's astonishment, the wolf obeyed. Its growl softened into a low whine, its body stiffening as if caught in a moment of hesitation. The king stepped closer, placing a hand gently on the creature's massive head. "I won't let you win," he whispered, his voice filled with resolve. For a moment, there was stillness. The wolf's fiery eyes met the king's, and in that brief instant, something passed between them. A flicker of recognition. A bond that hadn't been completely shattered. The doctor watched, stunned, as the wolf's body relaxed, its growl dying down. It wasn't healed, not yet, but for the first time in days, the parasite seemed to loosen its grip, just a little. The king turned to the doctor, his face grim but hopeful. "It's not over," he said quietly. "But I know one thing. The wolf can still fight. It hasn't given up yet, and neither will I." The doctor felt a surge of hope rise within her. They weren't helpless. They had a chance. The fight had shifted. It wasn't just about treating the wolf's wounds anymore. It was about battling the parasite on a deeper level. The wolf was fighting back, and now, the doctor understood that the battle was no longer just physical. It was a war for the soul of the creature, for its identity, for the very thing that made it who it was. And she knew now that she couldn't fight this battle alone. The king's bond with the wolf was their greatest weapon. Together, they had a chance, not just to save the wolf, but to defeat the parasite once and for all. But the question remained, could they win before the parasite's grip became irreversible? Could they stop it before it took everything from them? The battle within was far from over. A dangerous choice. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty. The doctor worked tirelessly, her hands moving with practiced precision, as she tried to find a way to sever the parasite's hold on the wolf. But as she studied the creature, the more she realized the parasite was not something that could be easily defeated. It was not merely a foreign organism that could be eradicated with medicine or technology. It was far more complex, a being of intelligence and malice, crafted to adapt to every attack. The wolf, once a mighty and powerful creature, was now a shell of itself. Though the bond between it and the king still remained, the parasite's control over the wolf's body and mind was growing stronger every day. The once ferocious beast had become increasingly unpredictable. It no longer trusted its own instincts, constantly torn between its former self and the invasive presence inside of it. One night, as the doctor sat alone in her lab, poring over her notes, she was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. The door opened slowly, and the alien king entered, his face grave, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. He had not slept in days, the stress of the situation weighing heavily on him. His gaze fell on the wolf, still lying motionless in the corner of the room, its eyes dull and unfocused. "It's getting worse," the king said, his voice raw with frustration. "I can feel it. The parasite is pushing the wolf further away. It's trying to separate us, to destroy everything we built together. I can't keep watching it suffer like this." The doctor turned toward him, her expression hardening. She could see the pain in his eyes, the burden he carried. But what troubled her even more was the desperation creeping into his tone. She knew the king well enough by now to understand that he wasn't just concerned for the wolf. He was concerned for himself, too. The parasite's control wasn't just about the wolf. It was about him, about his very soul. If the parasite succeeded in taking over the wolf completely, it would have a foothold in his life, too. "Listen to me," the doctor said, her voice steady but firm. "We're not out of options yet. We have to keep trying. We need more time." The king shook his head, his gaze fixed on the wolf. "Time is running out. I've been watching it slip away, piece by piece, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The bond we share, it's weakening. The parasite is too strong." The doctor paused, her mind racing. She had known for a while now that the situation was dire, but hearing the king admit it made it feel even more real. The king's words were not just an expression of worry. They were a confession of helplessness, a fear that something larger than the parasite was at play. The parasite wasn't just attacking the wolf, it was attacking their very connection, their bond. A sudden thought struck her. There was one theory she hadn't tested yet, one that had been swirling at the edge of her mind since the beginning. It was risky, dangerously risky, but if she was right, it could give them the upper hand they so desperately needed. She turned to the king, her face a mix of determination and uncertainty. "I think I might know how to stop it, but it's not going to be easy. It's a dangerous choice, and I need you to trust me." The king looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and hope. "What do you mean? What are you suggesting?" The doctor took a deep breath. "The parasite's strength doesn't just lie in its control over the wolf's body. It feeds on the bond you share with the wolf. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. But if we can sever that connection, if we can break the bond between you and the wolf, it will lose its power. Without that connection, the parasite will have nothing to feed on." The king's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Are you saying we should cut ties? Give up the bond we've had for so long?" The doctor nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling heavily in the room. "Yes, but it's not about abandoning the wolf. It's about saving it. If we can break the connection just long enough for the parasite to lose its grip, we can then treat the wolf without interference. The parasite will have no way to manipulate it." The king's eyes widened. The idea was as bold as it was dangerous. To sever the bond between him and the wolf was to sever a part of himself, to tear away years of companionship and loyalty. It was a sacrifice that felt unbearable. The connection between them was more than just a bond. It was a shared history, a shared identity. The thought of giving that up, even temporarily, felt like ripping apart a part of his soul. But as he looked at the wolf, its suffering more evident than ever, he realized there was no other choice. The parasite had taken everything from them already, had twisted the wolf into something it was never meant to be. The king had watched helplessly as the creature he loved fell further into the parasite's grasp. The bond that had once been a source of strength had now become a weakness. "I trust you," the king said, his voice filled with finality. "But if this goes wrong, if it's too late?" The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. "If we don't try, we'll lose the wolf forever. We have to take the risk. It's the only way." The king hesitated for a moment, his face filled with torment, but then he nodded. "Do what you must." With that, the doctor moved forward, preparing the necessary equipment for the procedure. The room grew thick with anticipation, and the king took a step back, watching as she worked. This was it, the moment where everything would change. As the doctor began the delicate procedure, the bond between the king and the wolf began to slowly unravel. It was as though the air itself shifted, as if the very space between them was being torn apart. The wolf's body spasmed violently, as though it could sense the severing of the connection. The parasite fought against them, its tendrils tightening and flailing, but it was too late. The bond, once so strong, was now weakening. The king felt it, like a part of him being pulled away. His heart ached, and he could feel the emptiness that began to grow inside him. But it was necessary. For the wolf to survive, for the parasite to lose its hold, he had to let go. With a final push, the connection was broken. The wolf howled in agony, its eyes flickering with confusion, as if it didn't understand why its master was no longer with it. The room was silent except for the creature's desperate cries. The doctor looked at the king, her expression somber. "It's done." The king stood motionless, the weight of the decision sinking in. The battle had taken an irreversible turn. The wolf was freed from the parasite's immediate control, but at what cost? Would the wolf remember him? Would the bond ever be restored? And most importantly, had they done enough to defeat the parasite? The room was filled with uncertainty, but one thing was clear: the fight was far from over. The king had made his choice. Now they had to pray it was the right one. A new beginning. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, uncertain hope. The severing of the bond had come at a high cost, and neither the king nor the doctor could ignore the emotional toll it had taken. The wolf, though no longer under the full control of the parasite, remained in a state of confusion. It was like waking from a nightmare, disoriented and uncertain of what was real. The creature's eyes, once filled with a fiery aggression, now held a deep sadness, as if it was mourning something it had lost, but it didn't know what. The king stayed by the wolf's side, never leaving, his presence a silent anchor as the creature struggled to regain itself. The doctor continued her work, observing the wolf's reactions, looking for any sign that it was regaining control of its own mind. The parasite, though weakened, had left its mark. It was clear that the wolf had been changed, twisted, in a way, by the experiences it had gone through. One evening, as the sky outside darkened with the first hints of night, the wolf finally stirred. The doctor, who had been sitting quietly nearby, noticed the subtle change in its breathing pattern. The wolf's eyes fluttered open, though it took a few moments for them to focus properly. At first, they were distant, almost as if the creature didn't recognize where it was. But then they slowly shifted toward the king, who stood at the edge of the room, watching patiently. The wolf's body shifted slightly, its large frame rising on trembling legs. It let out a soft growl, but this time there was no fury in its voice, just confusion and pain. The king stepped forward cautiously, his hand outstretched, and the wolf froze. For a moment, nothing happened. The wolf stared at the king with a look that was both familiar and foreign. It was as if the creature was trying to remember who he was, but something had clouded the connection between them. "Steady," the king murmured, his voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now. I'm here." The wolf's growl softened, and its body relaxed just a little. It took a hesitant step forward, and then another, until it was just a few feet from the king. There it paused again, as though unsure whether to trust the bond that had once been unbreakable. "Come on," the king whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's me. You're not alone." The doctor watched from the side, her heart in her throat. It was a moment of fragile hope, but one she dared not interrupt. She could see the struggle in the wolf's eyes, the remnants of the parasite's influence still flickering beneath the surface. But there was also something more, a spark of recognition, of loyalty, of the wolf's true nature. The doctor couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, the wolf knew what it had lost, and what it had to fight to regain. And then something incredible happened. The wolf took another step forward, its massive body trembling, but this time with more certainty. Its eyes locked onto the king's, and in that moment, the bond between them was reignited. It was not the same as it had been before. The connection was quieter, less intense, but it was unmistakable. The king had reached the wolf, and the wolf had remembered him. The king lowered his hand slowly, placing it on the wolf's broad head. "I knew you'd come back," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew you'd fight for us." The wolf let out a soft whine, almost as though in agreement, its body now leaning into the king's touch. The doctor watched, a feeling of relief flooding through her. The parasite had lost. It had tried to sever the bond, to turn the wolf into a tool of destruction, but it had failed. The wolf was no longer just a victim of the parasite. It was a survivor, reclaiming its place alongside its master. But there was still much work to be done. The doctor knew that the wolf's recovery would be a long and difficult journey. The bond between the king and the wolf, while restored, was still fragile, and the scars left by the parasite would take time to heal. The wolf's body needed to recover from the damage it had endured, and its mind needed to be reawakened from the long shadows of the parasite's influence. "We've won," the doctor said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "But this is just the beginning. We still have a long road ahead of us." The king nodded, his eyes never leaving the wolf. "We'll face it together." And so they did. The alien king, the wolf, and the doctor formed an unspoken pact, a partnership forged in the fires of survival. The road ahead would be uncertain, filled with challenges and trials, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that bond, unbroken, though tested, was their greatest weapon. Days turned into weeks, and the wolf's condition gradually improved. Its once wild eyes began to regain their focus, and it moved with more purpose, though still cautious, as if unsure of its own strength. The parasite was no longer a threat, but the remnants of its control lingered, leaving the wolf in a constant state of recovery. The king, too, began to heal, though the emotional scars would take much longer to fade. As they sat together one evening, the king, the wolf, and the doctor, looking out at the stars in the distance, the king spoke again, his voice filled with quiet reflection. "We've faced the darkness," he said, "but now we must build something new, something stronger." The doctor nodded, her gaze shifting to the wolf, who was lying quietly by their side, its large frame relaxed for the first time in a long while. The battle for survival had been won, but the true victory lay in what came next, rebuilding not just their lives, but the trust they had lost, and finding a new path forward, one step at a time. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, the alien king, the wolf, and the doctor had hope. Together, they would face whatever came next, and whatever the galaxy had in store, they knew they would be ready.